Representative Alonso Leon, Vice Chairs and member of the Education Committee. This is my testimony on HB 2697 and 2631. And yes, I have doves, and that's what you're hearing in the background. My name is Nancy Willard. I am the Director of Embrace Civility. This is my background. I'm a former special education teacher and former attorney and former education technology consultant. My focus at this time is on trauma, bullying, harassment, and digital safety. I wrote the first book ever published in the world, actually, on cyberbullying, plus several books on digital safety. My current books focus on civility in schools and resilience for young people. What does the data say? Oregon is seeing no progress on reducing bullying. This is from the 2019 Oregon Healthy Teens survey that covers the last 3 surveys. But actually, if you look at both the OHT and the Student Wellness Survey over the last decade, we have not seen any reduction. Really helpful data comes from the Eugene 4J School District, which has also been conducting surveys through this last decade. Their level of bullying on the Oregon Healthy Teen and Student Wellness Survey is similar to the state level. So the data that you see here is probably similar to what would be seen in other school districts. Note, they ask students whether or not they've been bullied or harassed, and harassed is based on protective class status, and they look at it by frequency. So we've got 8.76% of secondary students who report being bullied or harassed or both once a week or more. Note the figure for those who have been harassed. These are students treated badly based on protected class status, 5.53% of all students. What percentage of protected class students are being harassed? That was not calculated. 4J also asked students whether, if they were being bullied or harassed, they would talk to a school staff member for help. 63% of students who reported being bullied said that they would not talk to a staff member. 68% of students who were being harassed said that they would not ask for help for a staff member. We have this mistaken perception that when we tell students to tell an adult if they're being bullied, this is going to work. The Youth Voice Project studied this issue, and they asked students who were bullied and feeling distressed whether or not they asked for help or told somebody at school. As you can see, in the secondary levels, about 2/3 did not tell anyone. And of the remaining third, 1/3 of those told and things got better, a third told and things got worse, and a third told and things stayed the same. So the success of the tell an adult approach is about 10%. So we really need to ask, why is what Oregon schools are doing to address bullying and harassment not working? Now, my opinion, having studied this for the last decade, is because they're doing what they've been told to do under Oregon's bullying statute. This is Oregon's bullying prevention approach. This is also the approach used in every other state, which also isn't working. Nationally, we're not seeing a reduction in bullying. So the approach is to create a policy against bullying, tell staff to supervise, tell students to report if they've been bullied, and then someone at the school investigates and imposes consequences if warranted. Well, we have to understand that disciplinary policies are not an effective way to create a kind and respectful environment. Staff will never be in a position to witness all student interactions. Most students don't report, or when they do, this does not make things better. And almost always, the investigation is solely focused on determining whether the reported student violated the disciplinary policy. As you can see, I needed a whole other slide to talk about the problems with imposing consequences. Principals are under significant pressure not to impose disciplinary consequences, and most bullying behavior is persistent, hurtful behavior that does not create a substantial disruption. Being suspended can often increase a student's social status. The targeted student cannot be told the outcome, so they never know. They reported and they're told, well, we can't tell you what we did. Often, nothing is done to support the target. Sometimes schools use restorative practices, but too often, this results in a forced fake apology and forced acceptance of that apology. Punishing a student does nothing to improve school climate, and punishment very often leads to retaliation. A far, far, far better approach is found in the federal civil rights regulations. The federal civil rights laws include Title VI, that addresses race and national origin, Title IX, that addresses gender and LGBTQ plus issues, and Section 504, that addresses disabilities. ORS 659-850 addresses discrimination within the state. These laws focus on whether or not a hostile environment has been created. A hostile environment exists when severe, persistent, or pervasive hurtful conduct causes interference in a student's right to receive an education and participate in school activities. So the requirements are that if a school knows or should know that a student is experiencing a hostile environment, that school must conduct a prompt, unbiased, and thorough investigation to determine if a hostile environment exists for this student. If a student is experiencing a hostile environment, then the school must take steps reasonably calculated to stop the harassment and prevent its recurrence, remedy the harm to the target, and correct aspects of the environment that appear to be supporting the hurtful conduct. One problem, however, is that these statutes only apply to protected class students, and we want to make sure that all students are supported in Oregon schools. To effectively implement this approach requires that the principal ask some significant questions, not just considering whether or not the behavior was bad enough to suspend the student. The principal needs to ask, what's the motivation or concerns of the student being hurtful? Who are the student's supporters and what role are they playing? What challenges does the target have and how can the student be better supported? How can any emotional or academic harm suffered by the target be remedied? And what aspects of the environment appear to be supporting the hurtful conduct? Because unless we get to the point of changing the environment, we are not going to be able to reduce this kind of hurtful behavior. Are any staff modeling hurtful behavior? Are there bias or lack of cultural competence concerns in the school that need to be better addressed? What skills might students, all students, be lacking in kindness, self regulation, and knowing how to handle situations if they're treated badly, engage in hurtful acts, or witness hurtful situations? Are students actively engaged in supporting a school community grounded in kindness and respect? And what are the social norms of the school around how others should be treated? And how can those norms be improved? The current situation in Oregon is that the OSBA bullying policy focuses solely on the requirements of the bullying statute. Principals are not taught about civil rights discriminatory harassment in their licensure programs. I know, I asked. Also, ODE has recently increased public awareness, and this has resulted in a significant increase in complaint appeals. There are also significant concerns for next year. There has been increased contention in our society, and students who earlier were experiencing bullying have been enjoying remote learning because the bullying has stopped. What is going to happen when they return to school? This is a significant concern that I have. So, what would HB 2697 do? It is my perspective that HB 2697 would provide a significant increase in principal confusion by adding a new approach for them to respond to hurtful incidents. And this approach is really not clearly defined in the statute. So he asked the question, if a protected class student is being treated badly, should the principal follow Oregon's bullying statute, the federal civil rights regulations, or HB 2697's new bias incidence process? The answer is that the principal should follow the federal civil rights regulations. So, by creating yet a third confusion, this I think is really going to do significant harm. The other concern about HB 2697 are the limitations that school districts could place on free speech that could then lead to liability. Now, OSBA has noted these concerns and they are providing guidance. This guidance was related to the regulation that was adopted on hate symbols. But before adoption, to forestall potential legal challenges, that the school districts document previous incidents, how these symbols would cause a material and substantial disruption to the education environment and interfere with students' right to be secure. Also, OSBA has suggested that adding to this list of prohibited symbols, uh, the school districts strongly recommend that they consult with their legal counsel. That's a red flag. And further, if you look at the case law, anti hate speech related to LGBTQ issues is more likely to generate concerns. So, the more I've looked into this bill and considering both the free speech concerns and the probable decrease in effectiveness in reducing hurtful biased behavior and effectively intervening in such situations, the more I have major concerns. So, my recommendation is first, consult with OSBA on the free speech concerns because I think they're significant. Second, if you're going to proceed, focus solely on the widespread or environment related issues, not putting forth requirements for any responses to bias incidents. However, I would suggest going a step further and shift the focus of legislation in this area away from anti racism against the bad to increasing cultural competence, a focus on increasing the good. So it's my opinion that enhancing cultural competence is really what we need to be focusing on. Here's one definition of cultural competence: having an awareness of one's own culture identity and views about the difference and ability to learn and build on the varying cultural and community norms of students and their families. And as you can see, there are a lot of very effective books and articles that are coming out that focus on cultural competency. However, we still have to focus on the issue of what to do about bullying, discriminatory harassment, and bias incidents. I suggest addressing these concerns under House Bill 2631, which is seeking to amend the bullying statute. The current amendment prescribes notification requirements for the school district upon receipt of a report of harassment, intimidation, bullying, or cyberbullying. This is helpful, but more could be done to increase the effectiveness of schools in responding to bullying, discriminatory harassment, or bias incidents. So, the basis of the strategy that I would recommend is to integrate language related to the federal civil rights regulations into Oregon's bullying statute. In doing this, you'll address the concern that the civil rights statutes don't protect all students, just protected class students. By integrating this language into Oregon's bullying statute, you can protect all students. So my first recommendation is that throughout the language of the statute, amend it to read any act or acts. This will make it clear to principals that they're required to respond to all situations where the significant act or a series of acts are resulting in the effects that are very effectively outlined in the statute. This shifts from just serious acts that have caused a substantial disruption to serious, persistent, or pervasive. Secondly, require that the investigation include an investigation of any acts of the school environment that may be supporting such act or acts. This is actually in accord with some of the language within House Bill 2697. This will ensure that the investigation is not just of the hurtful situation, but goes to the school factors that may be supporting the harm. Then add the following provisions: that the result will be a statement of how the school will correct aspects of the school environment that have been identified as supporting such act or acts. This will require a focus of attention on correcting the school climate factors that may be supporting this and other hurtful situations, essentially correcting a hostile environment. An additional statement of how the school will remedy the academic or psychological harm to the student who has experienced such act or acts of harassment, intimidation, bullying, or an act of cyberbullying. This will provide support for the targeted student in gaining resilience and the ability to move past the harm, remedying the harm to the target. And lastly, following all confirmed reports of an act or acts of harassment, intimidation, or bullying, or an act of cyberbullying and intervention, the school will conduct a follow-up investigation of both the persons who experienced or committed an act or acts of harassment, intimidation, or bullying, or an act of cyberbullying to ensure that the situation has been effectively resolved. This will better ensure that the actions of the school in addressing the concerns have achieved a positive result. I'd like to thank you for your attention to this short video.